The Senate chamber was buzzing with tension as Vice President Kamala Harris presided over a heated debate. Senator John Kennedy, known for his sharp tongue and theatrics, rose from his seat, smirking as he prepared to deliver one of his trademark interruptions. Harris, who had already endured several of his jabs, leaned forward from her chair and, in a rare flash of irritation, snapped. "Sit down, Senator Kennedy. You've made your point." The chamber froze. Senators looked around in stunned silence, some suppressing nervous laughter, others raising their eyebrows in disbelief. No one had ever heard Harris dismiss Kennedy so bluntly. For a moment, it seemed like the confrontation was over. But Kennedy wasn't one to be silenced easily. With a slow grin, he stood his ground and replied, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Madam Vice President, the American people didn't send me here to sit down. They sent me here to stand up, even when it makes people uncomfortable." The words landed like a thunderclap. Reporters in the gallery immediately began scribbling. Cameras zoomed in as whispers spread across the floor. Even Harris, for a brief second, blinked in surprise at the boldness of the comeback. The exchange quickly became the defining moment of the session. Some praised Harris for her firm authority, while others hailed Kennedy's defiant retort as a reminder of independence in the Senate. Within hours, clips of the clash went viral online, sparking fiery debates on talk shows and dominating headlines across the country. As the echoes of Kennedy's words settled over the chamber, the silence stretched uncomfortably long. Senators shuffled their papers, avoiding eye contact, while the cameras locked onto the two political heavyweights locked in a rare public standoff. Kamala Harris leaned back in her chair, her jaw tight but her composure intact. She tapped her gavel once, signaling for order, but the ripple of whispers refused to die down. "Senator Kennedy," Harris said, her voice sharpened with authority, "there are rules of procedure in this chamber, and I expect them to be respected." Kennedy tilted his head slightly, the half-smile never leaving his face. "With all due respect, Madam Vice President, rules should serve the people, not silence them. If standing makes this body uneasy, maybe it's because too many here are too comfortable." Gasps broke out across the room. A few senators smirked at the audacity. Others frowned, clearly frustrated at Kennedy's willingness to throw gasoline on an already blazing fire. Cameras zoomed in on Harris's expression, controlled, but unmistakably calculating. She wasn't about to let Kennedy's barb go unanswered, not on her watch and certainly not on live television. The moment was no longer just a clash of personalities. It had become a test of strength, of who could seize control of the narrative before the nation watching at home. The chamber felt less like a Senate floor and more like a courtroom drama unfolding live. Every word, every pause, carried weight. Reporters upstairs scribbled furiously, knowing they were witnessing a moment that would dominate headlines. Kamala Harris leaned forward again, her voice calm but cutting. "Senator Kennedy, no one here has silenced you. But there is a difference between debate and disruption. You are testing that line." Kennedy, hands resting casually on the desk before him, didn't flinch. His southern drawl carried across the room with deliberate clarity. "Testing lines, Madam Vice President, is the very job of democracy. If we never test them, we become nothing more than a rubber stamp." A murmur swept through the chamber. Senators on both sides shifted uncomfortably, sensing the stakes rising. It wasn't just Harris versus Kennedy anymore, it was authority versus defiance, order versus spectacle. Harris struck the gavel again. "Order," she commanded, her tone harder this time. The sound cracked like a whip. "This chamber will not devolve into theater. We are here for the business of the people." Kennedy raised an eyebrow, his smirk returning. "Then maybe the people should know who's running the show, and who's just trying to keep the curtain from being pulled back." The words hit like a grenade. The gallery erupted in gasps and chatter, and even seasoned senators looked stunned. Harris's expression remained composed, but her silence spoke volumes. She was weighing her next move carefully, knowing the entire nation was watching. The weight of Kennedy's jab hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Every eye in the chamber was locked on Harris, waiting to see if she would crack under the pressure or fire back with precision. Harris didn't rush her reply. She let the silence stretch, commanding the room not by force but by poise. Finally, she spoke, measured, steady, and razor-sharp. "Senator Kennedy," she said, her eyes fixed on him, "the people also sent us here to govern, not grandstand. If your priority is pulling curtains for applause, perhaps you've mistaken this chamber for a stage." The room stirred. A few senators tried, and failed, to suppress faint smiles. Kennedy's smirk faded slightly, his expression tightening as Harris's words hit their mark. He straightened his papers, buying himself a moment, but Harris wasn't finished. History does not remember those who shouted the loudest. It remembers those who delivered results. Which side of history you stand on, Senator, is for you to decide. The gavel struck once more, punctuating her words like an exclamation point. The chamber erupted into chatter, half stunned, half energized. Cameras caught Kennedy's face as he leaned back in his chair, lips pressed in thought. For the first time that day, he looked as though Harris had managed to corner him. Outside the chamber, news alerts buzzed across phones nationwide. Headlines were already being drafted: "Harris strikes back" and Kennedy checked on Senate floor. The showdown had officially turned into a battle of endurance. The Senate chamber was still buzzing from Harris's sharp rebuke when Senator Kennedy leaned forward once more, unwilling to let the moment slip from his grasp. His voice cut through the noise, calm but laced with defiance. "Madam Vice President," he began, his tone almost theatrical, "you speak of history remembering results, but history also remembers courage. And sometimes, courage means saying what others are too afraid to say." The words hung in the air, heavy with challenge. Some senators nodded in agreement, while others shook their heads, clearly weary of Kennedy's theatrics. Harris raised an eyebrow, her posture unshaken. "Courage without discipline is chaos," she replied coolly. "And chaos is the last thing the American people need from this body." The back and forth had now become more than an exchange, it was a duel, each side throwing carefully crafted lines meant to resonate far beyond the chamber walls. Kennedy, refusing to sit, pointed toward the gallery of reporters. "The American people are watching right now, Madam Vice President. They don't need polished speeches. They need honesty, even if it ruffles feathers." Gasps rippled across the chamber as his words carried upward to the press. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of expression on both faces. Harris's calm stare against Kennedy's fiery insistence became an instant symbol of the clash. What neither of them could control, however, was how their words would be spun once they left the chamber. Within minutes, clips were already being uploaded, dissected, and shared at lightning speed. The clash was no longer just Senate drama, it was a national spectacle. As Harris and Kennedy's exchange played out in real time, the outside world was already ablaze. Newsrooms across the country scrambled to rearrange programming. Cable networks cut into their scheduled coverage, replaying the clash in a continuous loop. On social media, hashtags erupted within minutes, hashtag Harris vs. Kennedy, hashtag sit-down moment, and hashtag frozen nation. Clips spread like wildfire, with millions watching the confrontation unfold again and again. Commentators wasted no time taking sides. One anchor leaned forward in disbelief, declaring, "We've never seen Harris snap so directly at a sitting senator. This is a defining moment for her leadership." Another analyst countered, but Kennedy's response struck a nerve. He tapped into frustration with politics as usual, and that's going to resonate with a lot of voters. Talk shows replayed Kennedy's line about courage while dissecting Harris's sharp reminder about discipline. Pundits debated which message would stick harder with the American people. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens flooded online platforms with their own takes. Some praised Harris for finally putting Kennedy in his place. Others applauded Kennedy for refusing to bow down. The country seemed split, but everyone agreed on one thing: the clash was unforgettable. Back inside the Senate chamber, the atmosphere remained charged. Harris tried to steer the session back to the agenda, but the sense of spectacle lingered like static in the air. Kennedy sat calmly, knowing that outside these walls, his words were already being weaponized for headlines. This was no longer just about a debate. It had become a national conversation. The session limped forward, but everyone in the chamber knew the debate had already been hijacked by the Harris-Kennedy showdown. Senators shuffled papers, trying to look busy, though most were still stealing glances at the two figures who had just turned the room into a battlefield. Senator Kennedy wasn't finished. He rose again, slower this time, deliberately letting the weight of the moment follow him. With the cameras still locked on, he cleared his throat and said, "Madam Vice President, leadership isn't measured by a gavel or a title, it's measured by whether you can face the truth, even when it's uncomfortable." Gasps and murmurs rolled through the chamber like thunder. Some senators rolled their eyes, others leaned forward, almost enjoying the spectacle. Kennedy wasn't just addressing Harris anymore, he was performing for the nation. Harris, unflinching, rested her hand on the desk before her. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "And the truth, Senator," she replied steadily, "is that showmanship will never replace substance. The American people want solutions, not slogans." Her words drew a ripple of applause from the gallery before the gavel silenced it. Kennedy's jaw tightened, but his eyes glimmered with defiance. This wasn't just politics, it was theater, and he knew he had become half the act. The chamber buzzed louder now, like a hive disturbed. Harris and Kennedy had both claimed their ground, but neither was willing to surrender it. The tension promised more fireworks before the day was done. The chamber had reached a boiling point. Every senator, aide, and reporter knew they were watching a rare kind of standoff, one that would echo long after the gavel finally dropped. Kennedy leaned on his desk, his voice dripping with provocation. "Madam Vice President, maybe the problem here isn't me standing, it's that some folks in this chamber are afraid of being stood up to." The words cracked like lightning. A collective gasp swept across the room. A few senators even muttered under their breath, knowing Kennedy had crossed from sharp debate into outright provocation. Harris didn't blink. She rose slightly from her chair, her presence commanding the floor before she even spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, and sharper than any raised shout could ever be. "Senator Kennedy," she said, "if your measure of leadership is how long you can stand, then perhaps you've mistaken endurance for wisdom. This chamber does not reward noise, it rewards progress. And history will not remember who stood the longest. It will remember who moved this nation forward." The silence that followed was absolute. No shuffling of papers, no whispers, just the weight of her words sinking in. Cameras zoomed close, capturing Kennedy's frozen expression. His trademark smirk faltered, replaced by something more difficult to read. The gavel came down, echoing like a final verdict. The duel wasn't over, but in that moment, Harris had landed a line so sharp it sliced through the noise and shifted the momentum. Outside the chamber, headlines were already being updated: "Harris strikes back again, Kennedy cornered." The echo of Harris's words still lingered when Kennedy straightened his tie, determined not to leave the last word to her. He leaned forward, his voice dropping lower, more deliberate. "Madam Vice President," he said, pausing for effect, "you talk about progress. But progress without accountability is nothing but a parade. And I won't sit quietly while this chamber pretends parades are policy." The jab landed sharply. Reporters scribbled furiously, sensing another headline. A few senators shifted uncomfortably, while others hid faint grins at Kennedy's audacity. Harris didn't flinch. She clasped her hands together on the desk, meeting Kennedy's gaze head-on. "Accountability," she said firmly, "is exactly why I won't let this chamber be turned into your stage. You want a spotlight, Senator? Go find a theater. The people deserve more than your performance." The room gasped. A few senators even chuckled under their breath, quickly covering their mouths. Kennedy's jaw tightened, and for the first time, his smirk wavered. The duel had become more than a clash of egos, it was a battle for the narrative of the entire session. Kennedy had tried to swing the spotlight back his way, but Harris's sharp reply cut his line down before it could take root. Still, he wasn't ready to surrender. Kennedy leaned back, folding his arms, his silence speaking volumes. The cameras lingered on his face, but the energy in the chamber had shifted. This round had gone to Harris. The air in the chamber was electric, the tension nearly unbearable. Everyone sensed that Senator Kennedy had one last card to play, and sure enough, he leaned forward, his voice rising with a mix of defiance and theatrics. "Madam Vice President," he declared, "the people didn't send me here to win applause or to bow to your gavel. They sent me here to fight for them, even if it means standing alone." The words rang out like a final trumpet blast. Some senators broke into light applause, while others shook their heads, unwilling to fuel the spectacle any further. Kennedy stood tall, his chin lifted as if daring Harris to strike again. Harris remained composed, her expression unreadable. Slowly, she rose from her chair, her presence commanding silence without a single word. Then she delivered her final blow. "Senator," she said, her tone firm yet measured, "fighting for the people requires more than speeches and defiance. It requires results. And results demand discipline, cooperation, and respect for this chamber. If you choose to stand alone, that is your decision, but do not mistake it for leadership." The silence that followed was deafening. Kennedy froze, his lips parting slightly as if to reply, but no words came. The chamber was still. Reporters captured the moment, knowing they had just witnessed the final strike. The gavel dropped one last time. "Order," Harris declared. "This chamber will return to business." And just like that, the showdown was over. Kennedy sat back down, his shoulders stiff, while Harris moved forward as though the duel had never derailed her focus. But everyone knew, the exchange would live far beyond these walls. By nightfall, the showdown had already become the lead story across every major network. News tickers flashed with bold headlines: "Harris commands Senate floor," and "Kennedy defies, but loses ground." Clips of the exchange played on a loop, each soundbite dissected with surgical precision. On one network, a panel of analysts debated Harris's sharpest line. "That wasn't just a rebuttal," one commentator insisted. "That was a masterclass in authority. She didn't raise her voice, she controlled the entire room." But another pundit pushed back. "Kennedy's final words, 'standing alone,' that's going to resonate with voters who are tired of politics as usual. Don't underestimate how much that moment will fuel his base." Meanwhile, late-night comedians seized on the confrontation, turning it into comedy gold. One host quipped, when Kamala Harris told John Kennedy to sit down, "I thought I was watching a teacher scold a student." And judging by Kennedy's face afterward, the tension was already in session. The audience roared. Online, the divide was stark. Supporters of Harris flooded social platforms with memes praising her composure and discipline. Kennedy's backers rallied behind his defiance, framing him as a fighter who wouldn't back down. Hashtags from both camps trended simultaneously, sparking heated arguments across comment sections. The duel inside the chamber had ignited a firestorm outside of it. The question now was simple: would this clash fade as just another viral moment, or would it reshape the reputations of both Harris and Kennedy for years to come? When the gavel finally fell and the cameras were switched off, the atmosphere inside the chamber shifted instantly. Senators filed out, some shaking their heads, others whispering to aides about what they had just witnessed. Behind closed doors, conversations buzzed. One senior senator muttered to a colleague, "I haven't seen a moment like that in years." Harris showed steel, but Kennedy, he knew exactly what he was doing. Another sighed, "That clip will follow us for the next 6 months. Every interview, every hearing, it's going to come back." Staffers huddled in corners, phones pressed to their ears, relaying updates to party leaders and strategists. "It's already trending," one aide whispered urgently. The fundraising teams want to know how to spin this before morning. Even in private, the divide remained. Some senators privately admitted admiration for Harris's restraint and authority. Others, while disagreeing with Kennedy's theatrics, quietly acknowledged his ability to command attention. In her office, Harris was calm but deliberate. "We held the line," she told her team. "Now, let's make sure the story tomorrow is about discipline and leadership, not about chaos." Across the Capitol, Kennedy sat with his aides, his tone defiant. "They wanted me quiet. They wanted me small. Instead, we froze the nation. That's not a loss, that's a message." The duel had ended, but both camps knew the aftermath was just beginning. In the quiet hallways of power, the clash was already being weaponized for speeches, strategy, and the battles still to come. By the next morning, the Harris-Kennedy showdown had moved from a fiery exchange in the Senate to a full-blown political earthquake. Newspapers splashed their faces across front pages, while morning talk shows replayed the clash endlessly. Pollsters wasted no time capturing the nation's pulse. Early surveys showed Harris gaining ground with voters who praised her discipline and steady hand. "She looked like a leader in control," one voter told a reporter. Kennedy, meanwhile, surged among his base, celebrated as the senator who stood his ground against Washington's establishment. Campaign strategists on both sides scrambled to capitalize. Harris's team crafted messaging around results over spectacle, positioning her as the adult in the room. Kennedy's camp doubled down on his defiance, framing him as a fighter unafraid to rattle the status quo. Even ordinary Americans couldn't escape the conversation. In coffee shops, diners, and offices, people argued over who had truly won. Some admired Harris for keeping her composure, others rallied behind Kennedy's refusal to back down. What united everyone was agreement on one point: the exchange had stopped the nation in its tracks. By the week's end, the moment had already been immortalized in memes, parodies, and political ads. But beyond the noise, one truth remained clear: both Kamala Harris and John Kennedy had cemented their places in history, not for the policies debated that day, but for a clash of wills that turned a Senate session into a defining spectacle. The duel was over, but its echoes promised to shape politics for years to come.